The registry office glowed with cold white light as Audrey Constance swept through the doors like a winter storm, her coat dusted with snow. She gripped the hand of a stranger and pulled him toward the counter. Finn Carter, a single father who had come to fix the electrical system, barely reacted before papers slid across the desk. Audrey spoke in clipped tones. "Marry me, just 5 minutes." Her eyes held no plea, only sharp focus of someone running from something she could not name. 34 years old and the chief executive of Constance Holdings, a financial and technology conglomerate worth billions, Audrey Constance had built her reputation on discipline and silence. In board meetings, she ended discussions with verdicts that left executives both respectful and afraid. The public knew her as a woman who spoke little and delivered much, someone with no scandals, no public romances, no visible cracks in the armor she wore like a second skin. But armor could trap as easily as it protected. Audrey's mother had died when she was young, leaving her to grow up in a dynasty where marriage contracts mattered more than wedding vows. She had learned to hate being controlled, yet control defined every corner of her existence. The worst control came wrapped in legal language her father had left behind. A trust fund holding the company's core voting shares with a single, devastating condition. Before her 35th birthday, Audrey had to establish family stability through legal marriage, or the voting rights would transfer to a supervisory committee controlled by the board of directors. She would remain chief executive in title only, a puppet waiting for the strings to be cut. The condition had been buried deep in confidential files, known only to a handful of internal lawyers. But someone had stolen those files. Someone inside her own organization had leaked the trust documents and was preparing to activate the clause. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. If Audrey married someone from high society, the media would trace the connection and her opponents would prove the marriage was fake, designed solely to maintain power. She needed someone outside the game entirely. Someone whose legal history was clean, but whose social standing made him impossible to connect to corporate manipulation. Finn Carter was 36 years old and worked as an independent electrician, taking contracts for public building repairs and emergency calls. He lived with his daughter Louisa in a small apartment where every dollar had a purpose and every promise had weight. His wife had died in a traffic accident years ago, leaving behind medical bills that still shadowed his credit report. Finn had learned to be wary of anything involving large sums of money, and he despised the feeling of powerlessness. Fixing broken electrical systems gave him a sense of control in a world that had taken too much from him already. He did not seek charity and had no tolerance for people who used power like a weapon. When he made a promise to his daughter, he kept it. Tonight he had promised to be home by 6 to help with a Christmas craft project. That promise mattered more than any emergency repair call. Louisa Carter, 7 years old with her mother's observant eyes, had established a family ritual with her father. Every night before bed, she asked 3 questions. What made you happiest today? What made you saddest today? What do you want to change tomorrow? The questions were not complicated, but they required honesty. Louisa did not need wealth. She needed someone who knew how to listen. The forces working against Audrey had names and faces. Clinton Hawthorne chaired the board of directors with polished manners that concealed a hunger for control. He had spent years building networks among shareholders, lawyers, and media contacts, all positioned to seize the voting rights Audrey was about to lose. His lieutenant, Corbin Hale, served as chief financial officer and specialized in manipulating numbers to create artificial crises. He hated Audrey for cutting off his shadowy contracts years earlier. Together they had orchestrated this moment, counting down to her 35th birthday like wolves waiting for winter to weaken their prey. Vivian Hilda, an internal corporate lawyer, occupied neutral ground for now. She followed the law precisely, neither helping nor hindering the trap closing around Audrey. but neutrality could shift when the right pressure was applied. The night Audrey and Finn first crossed paths, an electrical failure had darkened the county administrative building where civil records were processed. The main server went down, security cameras flickered, and automated entrance gates stopped functioning. Finn arrived in worn work clothes with snow melting in his hair, called in on an emergency contract to restore power. Audrey appeared an hour later to handle urgent legal paperwork related to the trust fund, dressed in a coat that cost more than Finn's monthly rent. Her face looked carved from ice, every muscle held tight against some invisible weight. She mistook him for a building employee she could direct. Her first words were instructions, delivered with the expectation of immediate compliance. She needed power restored in 10 minutes because she had an important call. Finn's response came flat and factual. Rushing the job could burn out the circuit board and collapse the entire system tomorrow. He would do it correctly, not quickly. The refusal caught Audrey off balance. She had spent her entire life giving orders and watching people follow them. This man in his faded work jacket had just placed safety above her authority, as if her position meant nothing compared to doing the job right. Something small and sharp lodged itself in her chest, not quite anger, closer to grudging respect. While Finn worked, he made a video call home to tell Louisa to go to bed without him. His daughter's face filled the small screen, and she asked her 3 questions in a voice still soft with childhood. Finn answered honestly, his fatigue visible but his tone gentle. "When did you feel happiest today? When the school called to say you got an A on your science project. When did you feel saddest?" "Right now, because I am not there to read with you." "What do you want to change tomorrow?" "I want to finish work faster so we have more time together." Audrey heard the conversation from 10 feet away. She did not understand how a man this exhausted could still speak with such warmth, how he could be so present in his answers. Envy touched her briefly, a feeling she refused to name. Before leaving, Audrey glanced at the contractor badge clipped to Finn's tool bag. She did not thank him. Instead, she issued a statement that sounded like a command. "If I call again, you prioritize my requests." Finn nodded without promising anything. Audrey walked out into the snow, carrying his name in her mind like a coin she might need to spend later. 3 weeks later, the emergency board meeting felt less like corporate governance and more like an execution. The conference room stretched long and narrow, its windows overlooking a city wrapped in winter gray. Clinton Hawthorne called the session under the guise of addressing governance, risks, and leadership stability. He spoke in careful language about Audrey's private life, creating shareholder concerns, letting the implications hang in the air without explicit accusation. Every word sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath ran the current of a threat. Corbin Hale followed with a presentation full of inflated market volatility numbers, graphs colored in alarming red, suggesting that Audrey's personal instability made her unfit to hold decisive voting power. He clicked through slides showing stock fluctuations that had nothing to do with her leadership, but everything to do with manufactured fear. The other board members shifted in their leather chairs, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the narrative being constructed around them. Then the legal strike came. A board attorney casually mentioned the condition in Audrey's father's will, the clause requiring marriage before age 35. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water, and Audrey felt her lungs stop working. She had known about the condition but believed it was sealed under absolute confidentiality, protected by attorney-client privilege and locked away in secure files. Someone had betrayed her from inside her own legal fortress. Someone had handed her enemies the exact weapon they needed, and they were wielding it with surgical precision. She had less than 2 months before her birthday. If she lost the voting rights, Clinton would control the company, and every clean project she had built, every ethical standard she had fought to establish, would be dismantled and sold for parts. She did not fear losing money. She feared losing the only thing she had created with her own hands, the only proof she was more than her father's cold dynasty. Marrying someone from her social circle was impossible. Her opponents would investigate the connection, prove the marriage was a legal maneuver, and sue to invoke the trust clause anyway. She needed a marriage that was technically legitimate but impossible to connect to corporate gain. She needed someone with no shares, no political ties, and a work history that proved he had nothing to gain from her world. Finn Carter's name surfaced in her mind like a lifeline made of thorns. A man outside her system, with a clean employment record and a life that had no intersection with corporate power. He was mature enough to sign papers immediately. He was also a father, which made him vulnerable to an offer involving his daughter's future. Audrey knew dragging him into this trap was selfish, possibly cruel. She did it anyway because she was out of time and out of options. The next morning, Finn received an emergency call about another electrical malfunction at the county building. He took the job because the payment would cover this semester's school expenses for Louisa. He had promised his daughter he would be home by 4 to help her make construction paper snowflakes for the holiday display. That promise sat in his chest like an anchor as he drove through the gray winter streets. Audrey arrived at the building before Finn finished the diagnostic check. She walked straight to where he stood, testing voltage, her face rigid and her hands trembling in a way she thought she had hidden. She did not greet him or explain. She simply said 2 words, "Follow me." Finn assumed she was an official who needed urgent repairs. He followed her down the hallway toward what he thought was another electrical panel. She led him into the marriage registry office instead. A clerk sat ready at the desk with paperwork already half prepared. All it needed was the groom's signature. Finn understood in the span of a heartbeat and jerked his hand away. He told her plainly that he was not a toy for rich people to manipulate. Audrey's voice cracked when she spoke next, a hairline fracture in the ice. She said she was not asking. She was demanding, but the demand held terror underneath. She offered him a straightforward transaction. A 5-minute marriage, then an annulment, then payment large enough to secure his daughter's future. Finn refused because his self-respect was not for sale. Audrey shifted tactics with the ruthlessness of someone who had run out of moves. She stopped talking about money for him. She talked about money for Louisa instead. Tuition, health care, a stable future. Finn felt something twist in his chest. He hated being bought, but he was also a father who could not pretend his daughter's opportunities meant nothing. He set his own conditions in a voice harder than any she had heard in a boardroom. Everything in writing. No mandatory cohabitation, no invasion of their privacy, no media exposure for his daughter. If this marriage harmed Louisa in any way, he would leave immediately and pursue legal action. Audrey agreed without hesitation, as if the signature was the only thing that mattered and everything else was negotiable. The clerk pushed the papers forward. The questions were standard, procedural, almost boring in their routine nature. Finn answered mechanically, his mind unable to catch up with what his hand was doing. Audrey signed fast, her hand steady even though her eyes would not meet his for more than a second. The official seal pressed into the document, and they became husband and wife in the eyes of the law. 5 minutes from start to finish. Finn felt like he had walked into a room with no exit. Audrey felt like she had survived, but the cost was written in the rigid set of a stranger's shoulders, a man who now carried a burden he had never asked for. Within hours, someone leaked the marriage to the media. An anonymous account posted that the chief executive had secretly wed an unknown man with no public profile. Clinton Hawthorne did not suppress the story. He amplified it, letting gossip and speculation spread like infection through financial news sites and social platforms. Corbin Hale planted suggestions in strategic ears, hinting that the marriage was a desperate legal maneuver to retain control. Finn's apartment building filled with curious neighbors and strangers with cameras. His landlord raised the rent, citing increased interest in the property. Finn felt his privacy shredding like paper in wind, but his real fear was not for himself, it was for Louisa. At school, another parent made a loud comment within Louisa's hearing. Her father had climbed the ladder by marrying someone rich, taking shortcuts regular people could not afford. Louisa did not fully understand the words, but she understood shame. That night, she asked her father the 3 questions, and her voice was smaller than usual. "Did you do something wrong, Dad?" Finn felt his throat close. He realized that 5 minutes had started to destroy his daughter's sense of safety. Audrey tried to manage the crisis like a corporate problem. She deployed lawyers to suppress media coverage and offered to transfer Louisa to an expensive private school where her name would not draw attention. Finn's response came sharp and immediate. His daughter was not a problem to be purchased and relocated. She was a child who deserved respect and normalcy, not isolation in a gilded box. The legal team delivered worse news. To defend the marriage's legitimacy before the board's investigation, Audrey and Finn needed to demonstrate basic elements of a shared household. They had to establish a common residence in official records. Without it, Clinton could argue the marriage was purely ceremonial, trigger the trust clause, and seize the voting rights anyway. Audrey asked Finn to move into her house. "Not really," she clarified. "Just on paper, just to pass scrutiny." Finn agreed reluctantly because Louisa was already suffering from media attention and he wanted his daughter somewhere more secure. He told himself it was temporary, a legal formality that would end soon. The house was a mansion that felt more like a museum. Long hallways stretched in perfect symmetry. White light poured from fixtures designed for elegance rather than comfort, and polished marble surfaces reflected everything back in cold precision. Silence pressed against the walls, broken only by the distant hum of climate control systems maintaining perfect temperature. Staff members looked at Finn like he was trespassing in a space that did not belong to him, their eyes measuring him and finding him wanting. He brought Louisa inside, guiding her gently by the shoulder, and his daughter went quiet, clutching her backpack as if afraid to touch anything. Her sneakers squeaked softly on the marble floor, each sound echoing in the cavernous space. Audrey watched them standing in her foyer, looking lost. Small figures swallowed by architecture meant to impress rather than welcome. And for the first time, she saw her home through different eyes. It looked frightening. It looked like a place where warmth came to die. Clinton Hawthorne moved forward with his legal assault. The board announced an ethics review of the chief executive's conduct, framing it as a question of governance, stability, and shareholder confidence. The real goal was forcing Audrey to prove her marriage was genuine, and if she could not prove it, they would invoke the trust clause and strip her voting power. Corbin Hale hired investigators to dig into Finn's background, searching for debt, legal violations, anything that could paint him as an opportunist exploiting a desperate woman. The first days of cohabitation felt like 2 strangers occupying the same cold museum. Audrey established rules. Do not enter my private workspace. Do not touch personal files. Do not disrupt the household schedule. Finn set his own boundaries. Louisa would live like a normal child with regular meals, consistent bedtime, and no use as a publicity tool. He told Audrey that his daughter was not a prop for corporate theater. Audrey had spent her life issuing orders and watching people obey. Finn did not obey, but he also did not argue. He simply did things his own way, maintaining standards that had nothing to do with money or status. When staff members treated him dismissively, he responded with competence, doing his work so well they could not find fault. Audrey observed this with something close to fascination. This man possessed something she had lost years ago, the ability to remain calm without needing to prove his worth. Louisa began making small changes to the house. She drew a Christmas picture and taped it to the refrigerator. Audrey stared at the bright crayon marks on her stainless steel appliance, unable to remember the last time anything handmade had existed in this space. Louisa asked her one evening if she liked cookies. Audrey said no automatically, a reflex response. That night, she quietly instructed the kitchen staff to bake cookies anyway. She could not explain why. Late one night, exhaustion and pressure finally cracked Audrey's composure. She sat alone in a dark room with her head in her hands, makeup stripped away, fingers trembling slightly. Finn found her there by accident. He did not offer empty reassurances or try to fix what he did not understand. He brought her a glass of warm water and said simply that she needed to sleep, or she would lose tomorrow's battle. Someone had just cared for her in the most practical, unglamorous way possible, without expecting anything in return. Finn quietly changed the lighting in the hallways, replacing harsh white bulbs with warmer tones so Louisa could sleep better. Audrey walked through the softer light one evening and felt her house shift into something closer to a home. She reminded herself this was temporary, a contract with an expiration date. Then, Finn found a legal memo left on a desk. The document outlined marriage duration requirements for the trust fund to recognize the union as legitimate. It specified a minimum period before dissolution, and if they divorced too soon, the clause would activate as if the marriage had never happened. 5 minutes had been a lie, or at least an incomplete truth. The marriage required months, possibly longer. Finn confronted Audrey with the paper in his hand and anger in his voice. She had lured him into signing under false pretenses, trapping him in a legal cage that was never supposed to be just 5 minutes. Audrey responded with her usual defenses, cold deflection, and strategic silence. Finn slammed his hand on the table, not with violence, but with the force of frustration breaking through. Her power was crushing his daughter's life, he said. His voice shook when he spoke. Louisa heard them arguing from her room and retreated into frightened silence. Later, Finn found her journal lying open, and the words on the page stopped his heart. When was Dad saddest today? When was Miss Audrey saddest today? His daughter had started including Audrey in the 3 questions, treating this stranger like family. Finn felt something break inside his chest. Louisa was getting attached to a situation that could end any moment. Audrey finally admitted the deeper truth. She did not fear losing her position or her wealth. She feared Clinton dismantling the projects that mattered to her, the educational funding for underserved communities, the data privacy protections she had fought to implement, the ethical standards she had built to atone for her family's ruthless past. If she lost control, everything she had tried to repair would be sold and destroyed. Her voice dropped to a whisper when she said it. She was not fighting for a chair. She was fighting to keep the only good things she had ever created from being erased. Finn felt his anger shift into something more complicated. He still resented being used as a tool, but he also saw her being hunted like prey, cornered by people who used law and power the way other predators used teeth. He set new terms. From now on, total transparency. Every legal document, every strategic move had to be shared with him, and Audrey had to personally guarantee Louisa's protection from media intrusion and board manipulation. Audrey agreed, but this time her agreement felt less like a command and more like a request for a second chance. Then, the investigators Clinton hired released their findings. A financial blog published an article describing Finn's past debt and insinuating he had married for money. The truth was mundane and painful. The debt came from his wife's final hospital bills, medical expenses he had slowly paid down over years. But the article twisted the facts into a narrative of opportunism and instability. Worse, photographers captured images of Louisa at school, her face confused and frightened. Finn reached his breaking point. This was the line that could not be crossed. But something else emerged in the research. Audrey's legal team uncovered records showing Finn had once worked as a senior electrical systems technician for a major infrastructure company. He had been excellent at his job until he reported safety violations in a project cutting costs by using substandard wiring. The report led to a worksite accident being prevented, but it also led to Finn being forced out of the industry through blacklisting and pressure. He had lost his career because he refused to stay silent about something dangerous. Audrey understood then. Finn was not poor because he lacked skill or ambition. He was poor because he had paid the price for doing the right thing when no one with power wanted to hear it. He was like her in a way she had not expected. Someone fighting against a system designed to crush integrity. Vivian Hilda, the neutral corporate lawyer, approached Audrey with a proposal. They could turn the board's investigation around by proving Clinton and Corbin had committed worse violations. Corporate manipulation, unauthorized access to sealed trust documents, financial reporting fraud. The law could cut both ways if wielded correctly. Finn remembered the night the county building lost power, the night he first met Audrey. The security cameras had flickered during the outage, failing at the exact moment someone accessed the sealed trust files. He suggested checking the system access logs to find digital fingerprints left by whoever broke into those records. Audrey used her authority as chief executive to quietly order the cybersecurity division to pull the server logs, bypassing Corbin's oversight of the information technology department. To counter accusations of a fake marriage, Audrey and Finn had to appear together at a corporate charity event. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and champagne glasses, filled with people whose clothes cost more than Finn earned in a month. Finn hated the performance, the pretense, the eyes watching for cracks in their facade. He hated the way conversations stopped when they entered, the way smiles turned sharp and evaluating. He went anyway because Audrey was facing this alone, and because Louisa needed stability. During the event, Clinton tried to trap them with pointed questions about their relationship, searching for inconsistencies that would expose them as frauds. He asked about how they met, what they loved about each other, when they knew it was real. The questions came wrapped in politeness, but carried the weight of interrogation. Finn did not deliver a rehearsed speech about love. He did not play the game Clinton wanted him to play. He simply took Audrey's hand when she wavered, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with steady pressure, a small gesture of solidarity that said more than any words could convey. The room went silent, conversations fading into stillness as people watched. Audrey looked at Finn and felt something she had not experienced in years, something that made her chest ache with its unfamiliarity. She was not standing alone. She had someone beside her, not behind her or in front of her, but next to her, an equal choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. The access logs revealed the truth. Unauthorized entry into the trust fund files had come from a device registered to the finance department. The intrusion happened on the same night the county building suffered its electrical failure, during the exact window when security systems were offline. Corbin Hale became the prime suspect, but a deeper examination showed the device had been used by someone in Clinton Hawthorne's inner circle, an assistant who reported directly to the board chairman. Clinton had orchestrated everything, not just to take Audrey's voting rights, but to seize control of the entire company. Audrey made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She did not want to keep her power through the trust fund's legal tricks anymore. She proposed a corporate restructuring to the shareholders, offering transparent distribution of voting rights that would eliminate the possibility of future manipulation. It was a risk. She was voluntarily giving up her inherited advantage to earn legitimacy through merit instead of bloodline. The board meeting that followed was tense and brutal. Clinton tried to deflect, but Vivian presented the evidence methodically. Unauthorized access to confidential files, manipulation of financial reports to create artificial instability, conspiracy to violate fiduciary duty. Finn contributed his own expertise, identifying fraudulent safety reports Corbin had filed to embezzle money from infrastructure projects. If the board pushed back, they would expose themselves as complicit in the fraud. Clinton Hawthorne and Corbin Hale found themselves on trial instead of Audrey. The board had no choice but to open an investigation into their conduct. The trap they had set snapped closed on them instead. In the quiet after the storm, Audrey asked Finn the question she had been avoiding. When this was over, when the legal requirements were satisfied and the board settled, would he leave? Her voice sounded smaller than it had ever been, stripped of the chief executive's certainty. Finn was silent for a long time. He was afraid of loving again, afraid of Louisa being hurt, afraid that the world of wealth and power would swallow them whole. But he also knew something had changed. Audrey was not the same person who had dragged him into the registry office. She had learned to say thank you, and I am sorry. She had started choosing transparency over control. Finn did not give her an expensive ring or a grand romantic speech. He handed her a small hair clip that Louisa had made by hand, decorated with glued sequins and uneven paint. Louisa had said that if Miss Audrey stayed, the house would feel warmer. Finn spoke quietly. He was not staying for money or status. He would stay if Audrey chose family the way she had learned to choose truth. Audrey nodded, tears slipping free for the first time in years. They were not tears of defeat, but tears of being understood. Clinton Hawthorne lost his position and faced legal investigation for corporate manipulation and breach of fiduciary duty. Corbin Hale was terminated and charged with financial fraud. The company entered a period of restructuring, more transparent and more ethical than it had been under her father's rule. Audrey kept the projects that mattered, the ones built on integrity instead of exploitation. She transformed the cold mansion into something warmer. The lighting changed, the kitchen started to smell like baking cookies, and the refrigerator held Louisa's crayon drawings instead of corporate calendars. Audrey learned to speak with less certainty and more honesty, to ask instead of demand, to admit when she did not know the answer. Finn returned to his field with dignity restored. He became a safety consultant for community infrastructure projects, using his expertise to prevent the kind of corner-cutting that had cost him his career years before. He did not become the chief executive's trophy husband. He remained Finn, the father who kept his promises and refused to bow to power. Louisa no longer faced teasing at school. She grew more confident, not because her family had money, but because her father had never bent. One winter evening, the three of them sat together in the living room that no longer felt like a museum. Louisa asked her 3 questions, but this time she asked both Audrey and Finn. When were you happiest today? When were you saddest today? What do you want to change tomorrow? Audrey answered softly. She had been happiest when someone called them a family. Finn took Audrey's hand, and this time it was not for cameras or board members or legal proof. It was a choice made freely, not in 5 desperate minutes, but across the slow accumulation of days when they had learned to stand together. 5 minutes in a registry office had created a contract, but the weeks of fighting beside each other, protecting each other, and choosing honesty over convenience had created something real. The coldest person in the room had never lacked a heart. She had simply never had anyone willing to stay long enough to help her thaw.